I've got my finished pleated skirt panel here, so you can kind of get to see what it looks like when you're all done with one of your panels. But I'm going to go ahead and set that aside so I can do the other one. We can show you the easiest way to get these pleated. All right, so I've got over here my pleat ruler, and I've lined it up right here, and I put a pin so I could mark off my seam allowance right here. You don't have to mark it off, but I marked it off so I remembered that this is where I don't want to pleat, right here, because I want to be able to sew there. But I put a pin in every place that my pleat ruler tells me to. And it's not perfect, but it works. The best thing about knit is you can always stretch it and you make it work. It's so forgiving. I'm always amazed that people are afraid to work with knits because you can do so much more with it. So I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way until our next pleat. And I'm just going to call these pin 1s 2 or 3 here. So for the first top part, we're going to take pin 2 right here, and we're going to fold it over to our seam allowance line, or that first pin that I marked it with. And I'm just going to make a nice crease there. And I'm going to take both those pins out and put one back in through all the layers. So now I've got a crease and my seam allowance is hanging off over there. And I'm going to take this other pin and just pin it down a little further. That way when I press it, I can go about 2 or 3 inches down. And I'm going to remove those other pins there too, and do the same thing. So I got the first half of my pleat now. I still have these other 3 pins hanging out here. And we're going to go back and do the same thing on this side, except for with pin number 2 here. And we're going to fold it over and match 1 and 3. But we're going to fold it over the opposite direction to the inside of it to form the other end of our pleat. Now this isn't a full box pleat because we found that if you did a full box pleats on these skirts with this stretch knit, it makes the skirt a little heavy and it pulls on the bodice. So we just did a partial pleat. You can see in the back that it's not a full pleat. If you want a full pleat and use a lighter fabric, you can. You'll just have to cut your width wider. And the thing about these pleats and the pleat ruler is it's just a guide to give you an idea of where to start on your pleats. So you can always mess around with it and make your pleats wider, smaller, whatever you want for the look you want to go for. But we're just going to show you how we've been using this pleat ruler. So I'm going to unfold the next section. I've got my first pleat here. And you see I'm not going to pin all the way down just because I'm not going to press all the way down. I don't think it's necessary. Now you can if you want a really crisp pleat all the way down. So I'm taking this pleat ruler again, and I've got it here, and I'm going to line it flush to the edge of this pleat. And I'm going to pin again. And I'm doing a size medium, so in the pattern it tells you that you're going to expect to get about 5 pleats out of this length that you've cut, this width rather. And I did my first panel, and I actually kind of fudged fitting these into my fabric that I had. So it kind of had a wonky seam at the very end, so it wasn't straight. So I kind of had to make it work with what I had, and again, that's why I love knits, is I just stretched it and adjusted the pleat as I needed to. So again, I'm here with this. I've got this pleat. I've taken my pleat ruler off. I'm going to take pin number 2 again, and I'm going to fold that, match it right next to that first pleat I did. Pull my fabric over a little bit, give it a good crisp finger press again. And you're going to press this really good with an iron too, but to get the shape you want, you can use your fingers first. I'm going to pin it and hopefully keep my hands out of the way so you can see. So take that pin out and just pin it again down a little lower. So I've got the next half of my next pleat. Then I'm going to do the same thing we did with this one and take pin number 2 and match pins 1 and 3 over. And pin number 2 is back here on the back. Get a good finger press again. And pin it through all the layers. Take out my extras and pin it down a little bit. And if you don't want to use pins to mark those pin lines from your pleat ruler, you can use a fabric marking pen, which is really simple, especially if you just keep it where the mark is in the seam allowance. You don't even have to worry about washing it off or anything. So here's my thing, my first 2 pleats. And I kind of use this as a guide to see if I've been doing it pretty close to accurate. And if it's not perfect, it's okay. You can adjust your pleats at the end, do what you need to do. And so from this pin line to this pin line is actually the width of my pleat. And they're pretty close. I mean, I'm off about 1/8 of an inch right here, you can see that, but I'm not too worried about it because I can adjust it at the very end. So I'm going to go ahead and move my fabric down. and do another pleat. And all my pleats now, I've got 4 and I'm on my 5th, which worked out great. I did, again, because my fabric, I made it work. I had to fudge this back pleat here on this 4th one, and you'll see how it's just a little bit skinnier than the fold over here. No big deal, they still look the same, they're gonna work out. I'm not gonna stress over it. Now, in an ideal world, you'd have a perfect cut, you'd have perfect pins, you'd have perfect everything, and it would just always work out. But the best thing about it, again, is knits, they just go with the flow. So I'm gonna move my pleat ruler here and move it aside so I can do this last pleat. And I left room for my seam allowance again on this side. And I haven't made my bodice yet, but I did mark off on my ruler how wide my finished bodice should be so I can test to see if this will fit. Now, if you have made your bodice and you come out and your pleats are a little wider or shorter than your skirt, you can adjust your pleats by stretching them when you sew so that they'll fit. And especially on a princess seam type of pattern, you can take a lot bigger of a seam allowance or smaller to give you a little bit more room or less room. But that is definitely going to affect how this pleat ruler will work for you. And if it turns out you need a ton more space, I would just start moving your folds in on each pleat closer together or further apart so you can give yourself a little bit more room. So here's my last pleat. And I've got my seam allowance. I'm going to pin down just a little bit. Okay, so here are all 5. I'm going to grab my ruler over here, and from yellow edge to yellow edge should be about the width of my bodice. It looks just about right. I can roll out my rolled edges here, and it looks like they're going to fit just perfect with my finished bodice. So that means that when I do my bodice, I probably don't want to take any in on the width on my seam allowances. I want to stick to my 1/4 inch seam allowances.